Nathan Zegura.
How you guys doing? You guys there?
Hello, hello. Now I can hear
Hey.
me. And now I can hear
Yeah,
you.
All right, you were up.
All right, let's do it live on a First Friday Miracle edition of the program. I am merely Beau. He is the great Z. How you living?
Doing fine here on a First Friday, which is always a great day. And then, we're a week away from the Combine, which is exciting. And
Is it?
It is exciting.
It'll be exciting once we get there. I'm not thrilled about the drive. It's about as bad a drive as you can have.
I mean, it's not fun. It's not a fun drive.
It's also, I don't know, it's not a common road trip from people from here. But when I was in Columbus, that was a very common road trip. Like, you'd go to Indy all the time for Big Ten tournaments, Big Ten championship games. Like, you're in Indy a lot.
Sure.
Those are easy trips if you want to go to Bloomington to watch Ohio State, Indiana. If you want to go to West Lafayette, you'd always do that drive. I got used to it. We haven't made it. This will be 3 years, 2 years.
No, we went in 20.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We
We
went,
were
and then
right
it was over.
before. Yep.
Right before. It was the last thing we did. So, first time since 2020 we went. And for those of you who have never made the trip, I think that you don't understand what you are in for once you cross the Ohio border into Indiana. And the best way that I could describe it is human Frogger with the potholes.
There are quite a few.
It is, that is not an autopilot situation.
Oh,
That
no.
is a weave situation. That's a bob and weave. For some reason, much of that road, if memory serves, is 2-lane, and it
All of
feels
it.
like it should be 4.
all of it. And oftentimes one is
One's in construction.
or shut
I mean,
down
these
or-
are two major cities in the United States, Indianapolis and Columbus. I think Columbus is the 13th largest city in the country. Like, there's quite a bit of trade that goes on that route, and the idea that
Yeah.
that's not a 4-lane road, that the duration of that is absurd, my friend.
It is a little absurd. Indeed, it is.
So no,
But I am
that part
excited
I dread. The rest of once we get there, it'll be good.
Well, then you're going to get, we're going to start to get into we're going to get some information. We're going to start to figure things out and feel things out. And what's the scuttlebutt around the league and where does everything stand? And, right now for the Cleveland Browns, look, the fact of the matter is there's going to be action with this franchise this offseason. You've got right now one of your 4 starting defensive linemen from a year ago under contract. You have a glaring need at wide receiver to upgrade that position significantly. You have got, and that's part, as we talked about, of the passing game and getting the passing game where you need it to be. So you've got all of these things that are going to be, really paramount to the success of this team. I think you have stuff to figure out in the specialist department as well, kicking and punting. I don't think that you can right now. You don't, your punter from a year ago is an unrestricted free agent. You've got somebody in here on a reserve futures deal, a young guy who's kicked a little bit in the league and can apparently boom the ball. But you got to get your field goal kicking situation figured out. So there are big needs, and you think about linebacker. I was just going through doing the position review for that. Which will be available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Browns in a little bit. We've already got 4 of them out there for your enjoyment to take a look at. But, Anthony Walker led your team in snaps, called the defense, and led your team in tackles at the linebacker position a year ago. He's a free agent. Malcolm Smith is a free agent who has been a very valuable veteran piece of what you've done the last 2 seasons. And Elijah Lee, of course, special teams guy's a free agent in that position. And so there are a lot of things, for this team to look at. And David Njoku, talking tight ends. I think the Chief is as big, on the offensive side of the ball in terms of retaining talent. Clowney's number 1 defensively, offensively number 1 in terms of pending free agents is definitely the Chief. So there's a lot that needs to happen with this football team, a lot that needs to happen with this roster, and so Andrew Berry is going to be, I think, really have his work, cut out for him and competing and going through that and combining a free agency plan with the draft and with the focus on maintaining the pass rush we had last year and fixing, all importantly, the passing game by any means necessary.
Can I just say that I am not prepared or equipped for what you just did.
Why?
We were 90 seconds into this show on a February.
Yeah.
And you just went like meat sandwich football.
Well, we got a lot
on
coming
me.
on the show.
You just went meat sandwich football with me for 90 seconds straight I'm not ready for
All
that.
right, you want a deviation from that?
I'm not
flush it?
ready for that. I got to soft pedal into this thing.
Well,
brother.
I just did right before you got here.
That was an See, I think your circumstance before I arrived, your synapses were firing.
Well, I just did a couple of position reviews.
See, there you go. So that you're firing
and
you're locked into the world. I'm coming from a very different situation. I'm sure our audience prefers yours, quite frankly.
I don't know.
I'm sure that they prefer.
I enjoy some fun.
Prefer the meat sandwich that you gave them right there. But I'm not prepared to counter it. I wasn't. But we can. I'm for it. I'm for countering it and getting into the conversation. And I would say, based on everything you just laid out, and this is kind of, I feel, about where we are as a franchise, and for Andrew Berry, he's surfing on a razor blade here. Because he has had 2 exemplary off seasons as a general manager of this football team. And you, as a fan base, ought to have full confidence in the things that he will be able to do this season. I would also say that the first 2 off seasons for him, much of it of his own doing, a lot went right. A lot fell into place. Every box was checked. I don't know if you looked at the last 2 off seasons, if you could say, boy, I wish we could have done a little better here. You pretty much got everybody you wanted, be it in the draft or be it in free agency, however you acquired him, sometime via trade. All of those things worked. This, and this is why I say it's surfing on a razor blade, this is far more complicated, and there's far more layers to it. And it's not as simple as go do this, go do that, because there are tentacles to every decision that he makes now. And the tentacles reach so deep and go across that.
Not prepared. Listen to you. You're just absolutely crushing it right now.
No, wasn't. I was not. I had 6 more Bootsy tales for you. So instead, we go in this direction, and you say, you think about an offseason of consequence and how critical it is. It can't get more, because you have a roster that, aside from the inabilities to throw the ball down the field and be dangerous in the passing game, is built for now. It's built to win now.
Yes.
So the problem is, the thing that has to get fixed is the hardest to come by. An elite passing game. It's the hardest thing to come by. You either draft it or you fall into it. Most oftentimes you draft it. And the same is true at defensive end. That's a little easier needle to thread because you have Jadeveon Clowney. He was here. We believe he had a really good experience, and we agree that he had a great year playing next to Miles and probably would like to continue doing that, we hope. But even that we don't control. And when you talk about trying to fix it, it's tough. Really, really tough. And that's the reality of it.
Well, and the scary part is that you had a team that went to the playoffs in 2020, right, and wins a playoff game in Pittsburgh and goes to Kansas City and takes that game right down to the wire against the team that would eventually go on to win the AFC, is that you had an excellent offseason in the 2021 offseason leading into last year was excellent.
Yeah.
And the team didn't live up because of a lack of execution on offense, and specifically in the passing game. And so this season, you can make all the right moves, to your point, but the thing that is the most critical needs to come from hopefully a healthy, rejuvenated Baker Mayfield, assets thrown at the passing game in terms of the wide receiver position. We'll talk a little bit about some of that with some of our guests here today. But that is what it is going to take for the Cleveland Browns to end up being the team that you want it to be. And that is to some degree in the hands of Andrew Berry and this front office and this coaching staff, and to some degree not.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. So we'll pause that because
the other thing you have
go
to,
ahead. Oh,
the
no,
other thing.
keep going.
Well, no, we're in the middle of it. The other thing I was going to say is, and this is just a reality of the circumstance, the last couple of off seasons, we were kind of the belle of the ball.
Yeah, and now we're
not.
Questions.
Now we're not the belle of the ball.
No.
The belle of the ball is down 71 South, and they have all sorts of cap room, and they got a cool quarterback, and they got a lightning fast receiver who's a game wrecker, and they have all of the things. They have the organizational momentum. We have to build that back. So that lays out how tricky this situation is. And we'll get some perspective on this. Joel Corry will join us at 1:30. Ben Linsey he's doing the quarterbacks, right? He's at 2 o'clock. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks.
Yeah,
from
he
last
did the
season.
whole huge Pro Football Focus quarterback annual that just came out, and it was not great for our team. And we'll talk about that, where we can improve and where we were better in 2020. But, yeah, it's an unbelievable deep dive and level of analysis amongst all the passers. And, we'll talk to them a little bit about some of the trends. Like, what do you what do the teams that are successful throwing the football, what do they have in common? Where does the success come from? How does it come? And I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation. And then, we got Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast at 2:30, and he just did a whole pod about Olave and Cinco.
Our guys.
Yeah. And so some people it's interesting. They're starting to be, for a while it felt like everybody was pure Cinco.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've seen some stuff on Twitter where it's now Olave's better than Cinco. And in fact, better than a lot of the guys in this draft.
The problem with Olave is he's Terry McLaurin, except he's even better than Terry McLaurin in the sense of how consistent he is, how good of a route runner he is.
A legit number one in the league.
That's right. And that's what Olave is. Olave is a legit number one in the league. Like, he's not a complimentary player. It's just that Ohio State has an embarrassment of riches at the position. Wilson's higher end athletically, and so that's why he's getting a little bit of a bump. You feel like it's a higher ceiling. Olave is a guy who's going to come in. He'll probably get drafted in the back half of the first round. He could have 1,300 yards year one, 8-9 touchdowns. Like, that could happen year one for him. They come in ready to go. Keep in mind, they also had Jackson Smith and Jigba on that team who's caught 300 yards worth of passes in the Rose Bowl.
In a game.
And is going to be the first receiver off the board next year. Oh, by the way, that room the previous year had Jamison Williams in it, who couldn't get on the field. Jamison Williams could not get on the field at Ohio State. He was behind Wilson and Olave.
Which is just wild.
Okay? Couldn't get on the field.
Yep.
How was he at Alabama? Pretty good. So anyone wanted to question what Chris Olave is all about, I think that speaks for itself. And Ohio State, they don't play favors. The best guy plays. So they felt the best guys were 5 and Olave, 5 and 2 in this case. So, yeah, they can play.
And they've got, by the way, a tremendous wide receiver coach who played at a high level in the league in Brian Hartline.
Yes.
So they're getting developed and they're getting professional coaching and prepared, groomed for the National Football League. Some other receiver news. Congrats to OBJ. Announced the birth of his child. Successful surgery on that ACL again for him. So congrats to him. And now I'm going to give you one little fun thing that I left out of our Charleston discussion from yesterday.
Oh, I look forward to this. This I'm prepared for.
So we at the end of one of the nights, by the way, Miss K had a shock top on one of these rooftop bars, which I guess she drank a lot in
is that some sort of
beer.
a canned beer?
It was in a bottle in this case.
Okay.
And she's like, this is like college. And then this night ends up being the crazy. We had a party and dancing around until 2 a.m. like we were back in college.
Oh my God, get out there living it.
Yeah, we're
living your best life.
But in the midst, before we got to the crazy dance party, we stroll into the Vintage Lounge, which I would highly recommend. Upscale kind of drink after dinner.
My type of joint.
Yes, you would very much love it.
Yep.
And so we sit down, and they've got all these great craft cocktails that they make, in house that are exclusive to them, and yada yada yada. And then I saw this thing called The Blind.
All right.
So they have on their menu of wines by the glass.
Okay.
They've got a dozen whites.
Okay.
And they have a dozen reds.
Okay.
You get to specify if you want white or red, obviously, and it would be apparent right away.
Yep.
If you can tell them which wine it is, it's free. If you can't, you pay for it. So you're saying, I'm signed up for a glass of red wine here.
Yep.
Chance to get it right,
okay,
free. So
you know what the 7 are?
There are a dozen.
Oh, there's a dozen. Okay, so there's a dozen. You know what the dozen are.
Yes.
How many of the dozen had you had?
0.
Okay, so it's just a crapshoot at this point.
Well, I mean, characteristics of certain grapes, right?
Sure.
Like you would think, you'd hope.
Oh, it's different varieties. So it's
not all of them
Cabernet,
are different. So there
could
are
be
some
Bordeaux,
cabs,
Pinot,
yes.
Merlot.
Right.
Okay,
So,
I think I could do that.
So there
maybe.
there was like 4 or 5 French wines, then some cabs, Zinfandel, a cab blend, a Meritage. There was a Pinot Noir. There was a Rioja. There was a Gamay Noir.
Okay.
Which is a French wine that I had not had.
Mm.
So we sit down and we get it, and Miss K and I go through it, and quickly we knew it was not something we were like really familiar with.
Yeah.
So we were able to I knew it wasn't a cab. I knew it wasn't a Zin. I knew it wasn't a Bordeaux blend. I was pretty confident. So we were able to get through everything. So pretty quickly we're like, it's either the Rioja, which we do drink some Spanish wines, but not a ton, or it's this Gamay Noir, which of which we were not very familiar.
Yeah, new to palate.
New to the palate. And it had kind of a sour taste, which it was a sour cherry kind of flavor, which was not, in my mind, consistent at all with the Rioja. Rioja does have red fruit, but that was not it. So the guy comes over, the bartender, and after a couple sips, and he's like, all right, do you guys have it? Like, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? And I said, and Ken and I, we said, it's either this Gamay Noir, which we're not that familiar with, or it's the Rioja. And he goes, you're right. So now it comes down to we've got to, like, put it down. So they give you this card. You have to fill it out.
Look at that.
The varietal, the country of origin, the region, and then the vintage, which, of course, it says all that on the thing. So
sure.
You had to get that blind. But if you're doing a true blind like the sommeliers do, they would put this in front of you. You'd have no knowledge of anything, and then you would have to come to them because they're so good at it. So we went with the Gamay, and we were right.
Yes.
He said about 10% of the time somebody gets it.
Yeah, I would say that's probably right. That's how I feel about. I would feel a similar way.
So it was a big triumph.
I'm not surprised. A man with
some of these moves. We were asking for confetti to fall.
Your culinary expertise, your appreciation of food and drink,
yes.
Your attention to detail on those things is not something that is to be taken lightly. So
and
I am not
got
surprised.
A very sophisticated palate when it comes to wines.
Right.
Very.
So I think that this was. I think you doing in that situation. I think I could be in a similar situation with bourbon, or frankly whiskey in general.
Sure.
I think I could track it down pretty easily. But I think that the point that's interesting is the last one where he said 10% get it. That's how I feel most people who drink whiskey are. 10% can tell the difference between Pappy Van Winkle and Weller Antique or Weller Special Reserve. Like, without knowing, if you just put it in front of them and told them what it was with a bottle behind, they would drink it and go, fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Probably 90%.
The hard thing, though, in that situation, we've done this a couple times with people where we've taken, like, for example, we'll do, like, 4 cabs that everybody there has had and likes.
Yeah.
And try to do that blind. It's hard to sometimes discern what is what.
Well, it's the same type of grape.
Yes.
So that there would be some discrepancies.
Floor wine, mountain wine.
Oh, sure.
Rutherford.
Yeah.
Calistoga, just trying to figure the Paso Robles.
Do you find that I think from a wine standpoint, the difference between what's the most expensive when you get at a normal grocery store, like Opus One, right?
Okay.
$350
Sure.
bottle of wine. So the difference between that and like
a $30 Behringer Nights Valley.
There you go. That's the one you introduced me to. The
That
difference
would be,
in there.
I think, blind.
So that's a 10 times different, which, by the
Blind
way,
would be
that's
hard.
hard one to get now. That used to be readily available.
I know.
Now it's gone. You put me onto that at the Combine a couple years ago, and
It's a great $30 bottle of wine. I mean,
at the
great,
start of the pandemic, I was buying that stuff by the case from wine.com.
Yeah. Oh,
crushing
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a tough one to find. But so there's a great example. Like, if you were to drink them right next to each other and see what they are, you probably could. But if I told you this is what this is, I don't know that the average person probably wouldn't be able to tell. Would be my guess.
And the fact of the matter is, what I would say in any of this stuff is the advice that was given to me one time we were out in Napa, and the winemaker at this vineyard, we all sit down, and he's presenting his wines, which were fantastic, Anderson Con Valley, and he says at the beginning, raise your hand here if you're a wine expert.
Mm-hmm.
This is a guy who's producing big-time wines in Napa, and he's saying this, so people were kind of like, sheepish.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really wanted to raise their hands and declare themselves an expert.
Sure.
And then he's like, you're all a bunch of idiots because nobody raised their hand. Because you're all experts. Like, do you like this or not? That's it.
It's the same. I mean, I don't own a vineyard, but what I would say to people when people ask me about bourbon advice all the time, and I have this thing that I've said before in the show, like the 3 bottles, go buy these, and then you can figure out what you like.
Yeah.
But it's a completely subjective process.
Totally. Taste is subjective.
It doesn't have anything to do with it. Price does not equal great.
No.
I won't do it, but there's a specific bourbon out there that is overvalued by 3 or 4 times. It's readily available, and I see people buying it, and they think they've got something. And I'm like, you don't have anything. In my opinion, you don't have anything.
Right.
But because the price is there, you feel like you do,
It's
and the reality
prestige.
is you don't.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, but again, you might to you because
Taste is subjective.
Yeah.
Right.
Joel Corry in about 10 minutes from now, off and running here on a First Friday. Cleveland Browns Daily, 850 ESPN Cleveland. Beau Bishop here for my friends at EOX Vantage. EOX Vantage connects core systems that don't talk. From reportings and analytics to insight and decision-making, you gain a real picture of your business. I know many of you have those Excel nightmares trying to communicate with your other business processes. You won't have them with EOX Vantage. They will take care of that. All your important data will be in one spot. It's going to help you visualize your business moving forward. With EOX Vantage, you can benefit from lower overall costs, better alignment between technology and specific business needs, scalability, easy deployment, and management. EOX Vantage makes your data work smarter. It's as simple as that. It moves your business forward. You're about growth, and your software should be too. With EOX Vantage, your company will scale effortlessly. Local presence, but global footprint, and trusted by some of the world's biggest brands. A 2021 Cleveland Plain Dealer Top Workplaces winner. I encourage you to check them out at www.eoxvantage.com for more information. You see, I saw the sports guy was talking about this with his buddies about the Elam ending in the NBA.
Yeah, he's against it.
He's anti. Just from a big picture perspective, whether you're into that or not is not really what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is when you have long-standing rules in sports, and we're going to see this in Major League Baseball where they're getting rid of the designated hitter, or they're adding the designated hitter to the National League, which I hate. As somebody who grew up a National League guy, I hate it that they're doing that. But that's going to happen. When you think about changing rules that have been long established, do we need to be more open-minded about that?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
just because something's been the way that it's always been doesn't mean it's doesn't make it right answer.
Yeah,
but of course you would be looking for that, right? You're looking. A tradition is very important because it allows you to then compare across time, right?
Statistically compare, but I think we can also acknowledge, and we deal with it in this sport. I would say this sport is probably the one where the statistics matter least.
Yeah.
You know, I think mostly we're looking at all pros. Were you the best of your era? There are those numbers like Marino's year in '84 that jump out. There are certain Jerry Rice's year. What do you have, like 28 touchdowns or some crazy thing
like
that
yeah.
1 year?
Yes.
So there are a couple of those things that stand out. But by and large, the NFL is not one that is statistically measured, certainly not the way baseball is, and I think to an extent the way basketball was for a long time, but I don't know that basketball is either anymore, viewed that same way because of how much the game has changed. I mean, how easy triple doubles are now and all of that stuff. That was something that was really hard to do when Oscar Robertson did it, not so hard to do now. So I think all of those things factor in. But I think that the NBA thing was pretty cool in the All-Star game, and I do think as you were trying to spice up regular season games, and I thought one of the guys on there with him made a great point, 98% of the games you played is to a number in your life. 21, 11.
Yeah.
Those are the most common. Play to 11 or 21. I mean, that's – why do you think 11 and 21? Is that a blackjack thing?
I don't know. That's a good question. I have no idea.
Why not 10 or 20?
And why not 15?
Why not 15?
Yeah, why not 18?
It was always 11 or 21.
Yeah.
So we always had two options. It was either 11 and everything's a 1, or it's 21 twos and threes.
Sure.
And I always preferred the 21 twos and threes.
Because you like to shoot threes.
The thing that infuriated me was we would play to 11 by ones and twos. Why are you giving the 3 so much value?
Why is it double? Shouldn't be double.
Shouldn't be. No, that's the right way. Twos and threes to 21 is the right way.
It is amazing, though, that it took people so long to figure out that if I can go 4 for 10 on threes, you need to go 6 for 10 on twos to be at the same spot.
Yep. It is the basis of my 10-year-old's life is what he has figured that out, in part because I told him when he was little, if you can shoot, you can play. He's taken, I could pull it up for you, he's taken like 128 threes this year as a 10-year-old.
That's a lot.
That's a ton.
Yeah.
That's a ton of them.
Where's the line for 10-year-olds?
Same as high school, 19 feet, 9 inches.
It touches right on the top of the key.
Right at the top of the key.
Yeah.
Same as it was for us in high school. Yeah, 20-foot shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so he can do that, or he can shoot 5 feet in, but instead he does that. It's crazy. And I never even would have, we grew up in an era where that was, you never even thought like that, So the thinking was get the easiest shot possible. You go watch games in those era, there might be 5 or 6 threes in a game taken.
That's why the mid-range game is gone.
It's gone.
It doesn't exist.
No.
It doesn't exist.
So they would either have to change the value. If they want to get rid of it or make it less or get the mid-range game back, you're either going to have to change the value of it. And I don't think scooting it back changes anything.
Not for these, not anymore.
Not anymore. You saw where those guys are shooting from.
Yep.
All right. great friend of the program, Joel Corry. We always talk to him at the Combine. He'll be on with us coming up next. We'll talk a little bit about NFL contracts, salary caps, where we're at. He's the best in the business on it. It's coming up next. Cleveland Browns Daily, 850 ESPN Cleveland.
You're down.
Hello. I got to give you a couple of numbers. Hello?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got me?
Yep. At 2 o'clock.
Waste Recycling, family-owned, operated. Whether you join them as a customer or as an employee, you're going to become part of the family. Visit Rumpke.com to learn more. Great pleasure to bring on a great friend of the program. He's Joel Corry, former sports agent, of course, NFL contract, salary cap expert, CBSSports.com. We encourage you. Wrote a great piece on the NFL offseason calendar, dates to know, where you are with free agency, contracts, all of those things. You can check that out at CBSSports.com, and he joins us on the hotline. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time. Let's just start with that because business is about to pick up, right? We've got the Combine next week. We could have some trades that are happening, and then, of course, they'll be officially announced later. But do you anticipate business starting to roll a little bit here in the National Football League in the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, you're going to start seeing more guys getting released. Anthony Hitchens was released by the Chiefs yesterday, and they picked up about $8.5 million of cap space. We've seen contracts starting to get restructured, like Kenny Clark's from the Packers. That's going to continue. And you'll probably see a trade or two agreed to before it can be formally executed when the league year starts on March 16th.
And, Joel, as you kind of take a look around the league, I know you just dropped an article right now on 15 players currently under contract who could be different uniforms next season. It is quarterback heavy in your article. And you know, when you think about that position, the landscape of the league right now, how do you see this offseason playing out?
It's unusual from the standpoint that I can't recall a time when you've had this many starting quarterbacks that potentially could be traded. Some of these guys may not, like Aaron Rodgers, if he decides he's happy in Green Bay. That's one who's not available. Deshaun Watson got to wait until all of his issues are resolved. Russell Wilson has the no-trade clause, and he says he's happy in Seattle, but you can't ignore him putting out a list of teams that he'd waived the no-trade clause for last year. Jimmy Garoppolo definitely will be on the move. So if you got those top guys who aren't available, then that second tier, like Jimmy Garoppolo, the compensation to acquire a guy like him would increase.
Man, that is all right. You mentioned those quarterbacks, and that's what everybody is going to be paying attention to here in the next couple of weeks. Is I guess a two-parter here. Is there a domino that has to fall first? And of course, kind of hanging over all this, Joel, is it feels like there's a lot of people who believe that Brady's going to play again, potentially in San Francisco. That potentially that could happen as well. So, with that in mind, is there a domino that has to fall first? Which one do you think it will be? And how complicated will it be to move these guys? Because in all instances, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they all have no trade, even Watson, right?
Aaron Rodgers does not have no trade clause, and Garoppolo just had one for 2021.
Okay.
And Aaron Rodgers will be the first domino to fall because he's put a deadline on when he's going to make a decision. He doesn't want to hold up everything with Davante Adams. The franchise tag designation period ends on March 8th, so he's going to make a decision one way or another before that. So that'll be the first piece. When you get to Tom Brady, that's a down-the-road type thing because there's no way that the Buccaneers are going to put him on the reserve retired list before June 2nd because they can't afford to have $32 million in dead money from his bonus proration on the cap in 2022. So they're going to want to split that over 2 years. And then Brady strategically has to wait and see what they do at quarterback. And if they go out and acquire someone who's at a high level, that means he has no place there. He could unretire. They'd have to take his contract back. They wouldn't be able to afford the $12 million, which would go back on the books for him, and then they'd have to either trade him or release him, and that could be the way he could get to San Francisco. But it wouldn't be anytime soon.
I want to ask about Russell Wilson because that's an interesting scenario. It feels like there are grumblings all the time, and then no, everything's great, but it just feels like maybe there's fire there where there's been a lot of smoke for a couple of years. How do you see the Russell Wilson situation going down, and what are the impacts for the team that trades for him as well as that of Seattle?
I really don't think he's going to get traded because Pete Carroll's 71 years old. He's not trying to start over with the new quarterback. They lost every close game imaginable this year, so they're probably thinking we're not far off. And I know it's a tough division, so he's not going to want to trade Russell. Russell will have to really be adamant about getting traded and force his way out in order for that to happen. So I put that on the back burner.
Joel, we saw this it's much more difficult in the NBA, obviously, or in the NFL than the NBA, but we've seen player empowerment for a long time in the NFL. Players taking smaller deals so that they have free agency to leverage. We keep wondering if an NFL player will do this. Rodgers did it to some extent last year. Kyler Murray, a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of smoke around that situation in Arizona. How difficult, let's just, not to suggest that there's anything valid to Kyler, but let's say that he wanted to force his way out of Arizona. How difficult is that for him to do?
It's really hard when a team has no interest in trying to trade you because once you start sitting out, you have to accrue a ton of fines. And in Murray's case, it'd be $40,000 per day during training camp. Since he's on his rookie contract, it is forgivable. And then as you get to the regular season, you're not drawing a paycheck. We did see in the NBA that Ben Simmons was willing to give up $20 million in salary to force his way out of Philadelphia, but you just don't see NFL players take that tack.
Joel, I want to talk real quickly, transition away from the quarterbacks to the edge position. And a guy, Jadeveon Clowney, was here on a one-year deal for the Browns, had his best season since he was with Houston. How does that market look like it's shaping up? And if you, in your mind, from the Browns standpoint or even from Clowney's standpoint, what do you think it would have to look like to get Clowney here with the Browns for 2022?
He's interesting from the standpoint that free agency has never worked out for him, that he's had to take one-year deals at various places. He was franchised once, then in Tennessee took a one-year deal, took less money to come to Cleveland. So I don't know if his expectations are lower because free agency has gone the wrong way for him. And if so, then you should be able to get him in the same range that all these pass rushers went last year, which is between like $13.5 and $17 million. When he originally hit free agency, he was thinking $20 million plus, and that's how he ended up with the Titans. So if he's still in that mindset because he played better than he has since he was with Houston, then you'll probably wait and see if the market drops, and if it comes back to where you think it will be, or it's been the past couple of years, then you can get him back on a one-year deal. If he's got the lower expectations, then maybe you get something done. But I would start having plan Bs in place, and maybe one of those plan Bs might be a Zadarius Smith, because he's probably going to get cut in Green Bay, or maybe a Frank Clark, because I can see the Chiefs parting ways with him as well.
Yeah, those are two guys who are in your articles at CBSSports.com talking with Joel Corry about guys under contract who could be moved on from. You mentioned those two. What about a guy like Emmanuel Ogbah? And I think if the Browns could have a do-over in the Emmanuel Ogbah for Eric Murray trade, they certainly would take it. But what is a guy like Ogbah, in that group? I know Harold Landry's out there, Gregory. There are quite a few edge rushers, it feels like, in free agency this year. What do you think that kind of group looks like? And is Clowney going to be at or near the top of that market from a price standpoint?
I still think he may try to price himself above those guys. If I'm Harold Landry, to stay in Tennessee, you got to pay me more than Bud Dupree. But I really think that he may end up in Atlanta because Dean Pease, his former defensive coordinator, is running the defense in Atlanta, and they just cut Dante Fowler. I think it's still going to be that $13 to $17 million range for these types of guys. I don't think these guys are going to command the $20 million plus that is where the bottom of the top of the edge rusher market is.
Joel, I want to ask you about, as we think big picture, you think about free agency coming, trades, trying to work it, in terms of the teams that are healthiest as we look around the league and teams you're going to have to deal with for various players. Which teams jump out to you that you feel like could make a jump this offseason and really improve their roster dramatically based in part on the cap health that they have?
Oh, Miami has a ton of cap room. The Bengals are going to have a pretty decent amount of cap room, and the one thing they need to do is find a way to keep Joe Burrow from getting sacked continuously. And I'm curious to see what the Chargers do with Mike Williams. It's going to be $18.816 million to franchise him. You have Justin Herbert still on his rookie contract when he's as cheap as he's ever going to be. Do you want to take away a weapon on the offense by letting Williams hit free agency, or do you tag him? And if you don't tag him, are you willing to pay him $19 million on a long-term deal when you have Keenan Allen making slightly over $20 million per year as a wide receiver?
And you wonder if, and I don't know if there's even a possibility, but I mean, if you're thinking of a long-term investment, Mike Williams and his big playability probably feels like a better investment in money than a very good, if not the best possession receiver in the NFL. But that's what Keenan Allen is at this point in his career. Do you think could Keenan Allen be a guy that maybe is on the move?
No, you're not. You're going to keep as many weapons as possible.
Yeah.
While Justin Herbert is cheap, because that's the beauty of having a quarterback who really hits when he's on a rookie contract. You try to amass talent because you have this window of opportunity if he can really play, and you never have that opportunity again. We saw the Colts wasted that window of Andrew Luck, and this is a chance for both the Bengals and the Chargers to take advantage of the limited time they're going to have while these guys aren't making $50 million per year.
Joel, just let's stay with the receivers for a second, because it's a position we know we certainly have to upgrade. We're pretty sure that we'll attack that at 13 in the draft. Should be some good players there. If you wanted to get into it in free agency as well, what's the price, and is the juice worth the squeeze, I guess, in terms of some of the guys that'll be out there who could be added to this room to improve this passing game?
Well, the one that would intrigue me the most would be Chris Godwin. I know he had the ACL injury late in the year. he was franchised by the Buccaneers in 2021. I doubt that happens in 2022. We've seen in the past couple of years that when someone has a injury like an ACL tear, it doesn't necessarily affect your dollar value in free agency. Bud Dupree got paid last year, and it may affect you more structurally, but he's young. He's 25, 26. I could see him doing a 3-year deal, trying to get $20 million per year. Maybe the guarantees aren't what you'd expect them to be, and be in a position where he could hit the market again. Allen Robinson had a lousy contract year because he had no chemistry with Justin Fields in Chicago, but the previous 2 years he was one of the most productive receivers in the NFL. I'm curious to see how much that affects him. And then we have the guy you probably don't want me to mention, Odell Beckham Jr., who resurrected himself in Los Angeles, but tore his ACL in the Super Bowl, may be out half the year. So what do you do for a guy like that?
Yeah, and it's a group that's got some quite a few names. And I would remember, last year, Will Fuller would be a big name, and then he misses most of the year. DJ Chark, another guy. When you think about guys like that, or do you think that there are some guys that you could get 1-year deals, take some swings at that have shown the ability to produce? I think both those guys have 1,000-yard seasons under their belt, but are coming off of significant injuries.
Fuller, since he hardly played, and I'm not sure what's up with his hand because I saw a picture on Twitter, and I'm like, that should have been healed by now. But he's probably looking at another 1-year deal and probably trying to get close to the same money that he had this year, which was about $10 million, another $2 million in incentives. Jacksonville's got a ton of cap room, so that's going to really cut in Chark's favor. So it may be the Cortland Sutton type range, and you got Michael Gallup in Dallas, who tore his ACL late in the year. I'm curious to see if Amari Cooper is still there, because his poorly structured contract opens the door for him getting released. And if they re-sign Gallup, having CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper could be gone.
That would be interesting to see. So you think Chark's going to get pretty good money from Jacksonville, or it's at least going to drive his price up?
Yeah, they need to do everything possible
to
make things easier for Trevor Lawrence. It's a good thing they got an offensive coach in Doug Peterson, so he would be your best receiver when healthy, so I wouldn't let him out the door.
Yeah, there you. That's where you go on that front. What do you as we look forward to the combine next week, where everybody's going to get together, and obviously they took some of the restrictions off what we'll be able to do over there from just a media standpoint, and obviously from the player standpoint as well. What do you anticipate being the big stories next week over there in Indy?
Oh, there'll be somebody who does something stupid. It always happens at the combine that somebody fails the common sense test. I don't know who it's going to be, but it'll be somebody, so I'm waiting to see who that'll be.
That is usually the way that it goes, absolutely.
And how much, one of the things we always talk about it that we love about going to the combine is you come out of there typically with a sense of some of the big things that are going to progress over the offseason. And for a year where last year, they didn't know so much about the cap, you got a better feeling about the cap this year and money. Is this going to be a huge combine for informal discussions, as I like to call it, with teams and agents?
Yeah, that always happens, and technically that's considered tampering because these players are under contract. You're not supposed to discuss anything with players who are still under contract, even though they will be expiring shortly thereafter. There will be meetings with agents and teams throughout the whole combine period, and agents and teams will get a better sense of the lay of the land. Agents in particular will know which teams will probably have the most interest when that 2-day window before free agency starts. You can start legally tampering and actually negotiating above board new contracts.
Joel, great stuff as always, man. Thank you so much for your time today.
Sure, anytime. Thanks for having me.
All right, very good stuff. Joel Corry, CBS Sports, former sports agent, contracts, salary caps. You want to know it, he's got it for you. Guys, certainly the weather is cold again outside. A nice hot bath or shower certainly feels amazing. You can transform your bath into a custom bath. It'll feel like a spa. You can do so with my friends at the Bath Authority. They make it a reality for you at a fraction of the cost of the competitors. The Bath Authority is Cleveland's premier bath and shower remodeler, expert, faculty trained installers. You give them a call right now, $500 off your next custom bath or shower remodel. The number to give them that call is at 216-220-8399 or go to thebathauthority.com. It's where affordability meets quality, the largest selection selection of bath projects. They're all made in the United States. Change your bathroom from outdated to outstanding. Acrylic tubs, they insulate, keep the heat in. Tub-to-shower conversion, superior products, expert installers. TheBathAuthority.com at 216-220-8399. $500 off. Tell them Beau sent you on that one. Do you think we'll have Aaron Rodgers sorted out by the end of next week?
I hope so. I mean, I would imagine that the Packers would like that.
I saw the general manager over there talking this morning, saying that he would not take calls on Jordan Love, and Albright goes, "Well, none are being made on Jordan Love."
No disrespect. He included a no disrespect.
No disrespect, but no one would be making those calls. That's probably the first one. But the crazy thing is it doesn't really it changes the Packers' approach, obviously, because if he stays, then they'll find a way to keep Adams. If he doesn't, then they'll probably let Adams go, and they'll go into a full build on the fly rebuild situation.
Let Smith. I mean, there are a lot of good players
on their from their perspective. It would change that. In terms of around the league, as you're waiting on, if Rodgers says I'm going to play, but it's not going to be here, then they're going to have to work a trade, right, with him.
Yep.
So they would have to find a way to work a trade partner. Is that something? To me, that's something that would happen. Like, you wouldn't announce I'm not going to be here. Like, you just would make the trade, wouldn't you?
I believe that you would. I mean, and then it can go through until that period in March. But if Aaron Rodgers leaves Green Bay,
yeah,
the quarterbacks in that division would be, at this moment, would be Cousins,
yep,
Love, second-year Fields, and Goff.
That's right.
And then
this goes back to your question about, and I think why Joel said what he said about Russell Wilson. Like, if Rodgers leaves the NFC, and most people think if he is leaving, he's going to go to Denver. If that's the case, how far are the Seahawks from winning the NFC?
Not. So, hold on, just real quick. Let's say Rodgers leaves and goes to the AFC. In the NFC West, this is where the good quarterbacks are. If Wilson stayed, right? You have Russ, you have Kyler, you've got Matt Stafford, defending Super Bowl champion, and then you've got
Lance, whatever that is, or Brady. If it were that.
Okay.
You just did the NFC North.
The North, as we just said, dreadful. Cousins, Fields, Love, and Goff. Then the NFC South is a very aged, at this point, Matt Ryan.
Yep.
Question mark in Tampa. Right now they're talking up Blaine Gabbert is what's happening currently.
Jeez.
Question mark in New Orleans. And question mark in Carolina.
Yep.
Then you go to the East. You've got Dak.
Yep.
Question mark with the Giants, question mark with the Eagles, and a question mark with the football team. I mean, you could say Daniel Dimes, you could say Hurts, but clearly it feels like that's not where anybody wants to be, per se. I mean,
you do that same exercise in the AFC. You're writing down 15 names, it feels like.
Well, if you did it in the
let's
say Rodgers goes to Denver.
Rodgers, Mahomes, Herbert in the West with
Carr as
who
the
doesn't
fourth.
suck.
No, does not suck. And then, in the South, you've got Lawrence, you've got question in Houston, you got Tannehill, question in Indy. In the North, you would have question in Pittsburgh, Lamar, Joey Burrow, and then Baker here. And then in the East, you've got Josh Allen, you've got Mac Jones, you've got Zach Wilson, and then you'd have a question mark in Miami, but Tua.
Yeah.
I mean, if Rodgers goes, the AFC West would be outrageous.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
You have to think that plays in. He's got to be thinking about all of those things, I would think. And I think Watson is too, which is why he was looking into, the Vikings and what was he looking into? The Vikings and the Saints?
Yeah. See, I wonder if Rodgers and I mean, this would be he's owned the Bears for so long. The Lions have been the Lions for the majority, even though he's had to compete against Matt Stafford. They just haven't been a successful franchise.
Right.
And the Vikings have been good, but
I think he's owned them too, though.
So, do you think maybe he's saying the reason that I need to get more regular season battle tested than I've been?
I don't think so. I think he's just looking for, if he's anything, he's just looking for a better place to live and a change of scenery.
Yeah.
You've been to Green Bay. I have not. But I think the difference between Green Bay and Denver would probably be pretty substantial.
Yes.
In terms of the quality of life you're going to live.
Sure.
And maybe you just want to change, too. He's been in the same place for a very, very long time. OBM, Ohio Business Machine, preferred copier provider of your Cleveland Browns. They have all the X's and O's for your office. You can give them a call, 216-485-2000. Visit ohiobusinessmachines.com. Coming up at the top of the hour, Talk a little quarterbacks with Ben Linsey of PFF. He did an incredible deep dive into the quarterback play this year. We'll get into that, how to get it on track, what you need out of the position going forward. You listen to Cleveland Browns Daily on 850 ESPN Cleveland. Back into Cleveland Browns Daily. Beau here for Char Whiskey Bar and Grill in Rocky River. Enjoy over 300 whiskeys and craft cocktails paired with made-from-scratch menu items. Catch the game of the week at Char Bar. Enjoy date night with craft cocktail or enjoy a glass of wine, perhaps a nice steak. Check out the exclusive Char Old Forester Barrel. That is awesome that they have that. That is one of the great distilleries. They know what they're doing. Dine in or carry out for brunch, lunch, or dinner. Support local. Visit Char Whiskey Bar and Grill in Rocky River or at charrockyriver.com. With that, we head out on the hotline for a visit with Ben Linsey. PFF, this is pretty incredible what you did with the quarterbacks, Ben. Let's start there, and then we'll get into some of the data that you've ascertained. How do you put this together? How do you build something this out that is so comprehensive?
I appreciate that. I think I've had enough PDF formatting for the year, but just in terms of how that came together, it was you look at last year's version and sort of some of the stuff we've done in the past, and really just breaking down how a quarterback performs in different aspects, from a clean pocket under pressure, against a blitz in the red zone, all these different areas to sort of try and paint a picture of what their season was, where they need to improve, what they did well, and sort of how their outlook is moving forward, and trying to fit that into a semi-reasonable number of pages.
36 quarterbacks, 441 pages. I mean, you've got breaks down throws by route, their heat maps, everything that you could possibly want about quarterback play. So how much of this involves for you going through all the numbers and the data that are collected in a lot of the signature stats at PFF and then putting them into a visible form? And then how much of it is also just watching and going through the film and charting these things and figuring out some of the, the levels of quarterback play and the discrepancies around the league?
Yeah, a lot of it is pulling from the stuff we do throughout the season. A lot of the charting, a lot of the grades, that stuff is sort of already there. But of course, as you're putting that together, you're also watching the tape yourself and trying to add some context in terms of the little write-up we have at the beginning and some other areas. So it's a combination of both of those things.
One thing that and just, we talk about you guys all the time. We have many of your guys, whether it's Renner or Sam, we have you guys on a lot and love every time having you on. But for those of our people out there listening who are still just finding it, the one thing the objective here is to isolate individuals from team. That's the objective. And so to that end, when you think about quarterbacks, where the most important position of all of sports, who is a guy that going into this process ended up being better than you thought, and maybe your perception of him was, and who is a guy who ended up being worse than you thought, or what your perception of him was?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think one guy who was probably a little bit better than I thought was Mac Jones.
Interesting.
Just in terms of what he was able to do as a rookie. I know his situation was better than a lot of the other guys in that rookie class. You look at Trevor Lawrence, you look at Zach Wilson, Justin Fields in Chicago. They were really thrown into bad spots. Jones was a little bit better. But I still think what he was able to do in terms of how accurate he was offensively without a true number one wide receiver. I know they went out and spent on guys like Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith in free agency, but they're still really – Jacoby Myers is still their top wide receiver. And he went out and had success. So I thought what he did was impressive. In terms of a guy who struggled more than I thought necessarily, just in terms of the numbers, Patrick Mahomes is kind of an interesting one because obviously he's always going to be right at the top of that quarterback list. And he still is probably number one heading into next season. But just in terms of some of his overall numbers last year, it was lower than 2018 to 2020. Partially due to the way defenses were defending Kansas City in that offense, partially due to some other things. But I thought that was interesting just to see that little bit of decline, even though he's still in the top half of the league.
Talk with Ben Linsey from Pro Football Focus. Again, he put together their 2022 quarterback annual. Again, 36 quarterbacks evaluated, 441 pages of content, all kinds of great visualization as well, where you see these things. Ben, you mentioned something about, not having a number one receiver. with Mac Jones and why that was some of the things that he was able to overcome that impress you, how important as you go through this and study these quarterbacks, how important is it for a franchise to have that number one guy that defenses must account for or scheme up against in terms of overall quarterback success in the NFL?
I think it is important to have that top guy. Super important, just in terms of, one, the quarterback having confidence in that receiver no matter the situation. They know that they can go to them. You saw that in the Super Bowl with Stafford and Kupp, right? That last drive, everyone knew the ball was going to him, and he just kept going there. So having someone you have that confidence isn't important. But also just like it opens everything up for everyone else because of that extra attention, like you said, that has to be paid to them, schemed up against them with safety shading over the top. So I think having that number one guy is super important for any quarterback in the league.
All right, Ben, let's talk about our guy, Baker Mayfield. We know the injury situation. We know the numbers were not pretty, frankly, and struggles from clean pockets, a lot of the stuff you've documented here in this quarterback annual. Let's start with Baker 2021. What went wrong? Where must he improve for this Browns passing game to be what it needs to be?
The biggest thing with Baker last year, and sort of the step back he took from 2020, I think was the clean pocket and how he performed when everything was in place, when he was in rhythm, when things were schemed up. He dropped from 5th for us in PFF grade from a clean pocket in 2020 to 22nd last year. That's a major drop. And it's also, when you look at, he was under more situations where things weren't under his control. He was under pressure more. Part of that's the injuries they had at tackle. Part of that's just him sort of inviting more pressure. So I think it's a combination of him taking a step back from the stable situations and really struggling when things broke down, when pressure came. When he was forced to leave the pocket, he took sacks at one of the highest rates in the league under pressure. His numbers really took a hit anytime he held onto the ball for an extended period of time. So it was kind of a combination of those things.
Did you happen to before the injury and after? Because the shoulder happens, was there a big discrepancy one way or the other? I guess what I'm curious about is it felt like for us that there was, but as you're looking at it, once the injury occurs, what happens?
Yeah, I think if you look at his grades for us by game, the beginning of the year was definitely a little bit better than how he finished the year. So it's hard to really evaluate last season because of that injury, and you never are entirely certain how much that impacted him. Obviously, it did have an effect, and the game-by-game grades show that. Later in the year, those dipped. So there's a chance that he comes back in 2022 a little bit more comfortable, definitely more healthy, and looks more like that guy who ended the 2020 season. And he was really firing on all cylinders there. He was a top 10 quarterback for us down the stretch that year, borderline top 5. So if they get that guy back, and it really was the injury that sort of derailed things, that'll be huge.
Where did he excel in 2020 in that stretch where he throws the 20 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, the passing game is going? Where would you say, if you're the Browns, you say, okay, we're going to hang our hat on. Baker gets back to this level at these things. This is when we can be successful. Because it feels to me as just somebody who's been, I've been with this organization for 10 years and observing the league for certainly longer than that. You've got to be able to throw the football when everybody knows you're going to throw the football to win consistently in the NFL, right? You've got to be able to pass in high pressure, high leverage passing situations, obvious ones. The Browns, it felt like were able to do that over the second half of 2020. They were not able to do that at all in 2021. So what are the things that you would be looking at? You're telling Browns fans and telling the Browns, this is what you need to see. These are the areas you need to get back to that 2020 form.
The big thing is just giving him more situations where he's in rhythm offensively. It also is, that's partially on Mayfield to take those in rhythm plays when he gets them, rather than holding onto the ball and trying to do something big outside of structure. But in 2020, when everything was working, it was that clean pocket, fifth and clean pocket grade. Play action game was really effective. They ran more of it in 2020, got away from it a little bit last year. The designed rollouts is an area he really had success. So it's anything where you're sort of trying to keep the defense and the pass rush off balance. Those are the areas where Mayfield had a lot of success down the stretch in 2020, which obviously that ties into also the offensive line. It ties into the run game, all that stuff. But just giving him more of those opportunities should really be the priority heading into next year.
You know, Ben, that everything you're saying, I mean, we used to use this word all the time regarding Baker or quarterbacks in general. It's trust. Right? It's trusting your eyes. It's trusting what you see, trusting where your guys are going to be, where they're going to be, trusting that you're going to have time to throw, trusting your arm, trusting yourself. You can't measure trust, can you? When I say that to you and you think to yourself, okay, is that what's happened here? Does he trust that his arm's going to put the ball where it's going to be? Does he trust that he's going to be where he needs to be? Receivers is that kind of, it seems like that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it is. And I think that was a lot of it last season. It didn't look like, just watching Baker play, it didn't look like he had a lot of trust. And that's why you saw him holding onto the ball and sort of breaking from clean pockets and doing all that stuff. Just because he didn't trust his initial read, even if it was there. That's partially mental. But you saw he had some success even last year when he got the ball out sort of on that first read and got the ball out relatively quickly. They had success. So I think taking advantage of more of those opportunities and just getting more comfortable, which ties into the receiver thing too, right? Getting a guy who you really trust and a number one option that you can just let it rip to. I think that is a big part of it and why he struggled last year, because he didn't have that.
There was one thing I wanted to run by you that I was curious about, because I saw it from your colleague at PFF, Steve Palazzolo, that you guys chart something, the percentage of time that a quarterback had 3 or more receivers open on a given play, and the Browns were second in that. I think 36% behind only the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. So from a scheme standpoint, it felt like the Browns were still good. And I think when you're talking about going from 5th in clean pocket, which means everything is working the way it's supposed to 22nd, if you can just get back to that level of execution, do you still feel like that the Browns from a scheme standpoint are creating advantageous opportunities for an offense?
Yeah, I think they are. And that style of offense in general that they run, that's sort of becoming more and more popular with the outside zone, the play action. It is advantageous for a quarterback, and that's why you're seeing a lot of it starting to spread, because you create more of those open receivers with defenses biting on play action and stuff like that. So I think if Mayfield sort of gets that trust and he gets more comfortable like he was at the end of 2020, I don't think there's any issues with their scheme. It's just more of a matter of Mayfield pulling it back together.
So one of the things I was just reading kind of around this is that you guys talked about one of the things you like to look at with quarterbacks is clean pocket performance, because that is a more stable metric and indicative of future performance. And now with Baker, we had huge variance there. And I don't know what it's been if you even were to go back to 18, 19 was probably down again, 20 back up, 21 down. Is there, in terms of that volatility, is that common? And how can we smooth that curve out?
It's not as common as it is pressure performance is. So the clean pocket, if you're good from a clean pocket in 1 year, it's probably more likely it's going to be the same thing the next year, which kind of makes the sort of the seesaw Mayfield's done a little bit interesting as far as 2020 versus 2021. But even though that's more stable, it's still important, I think, to be able to go out and make plays when things break down. I think you see that with a lot of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, the younger guys, the Mahomes, the Josh Allen, the Justin Herberts, all these other guys in the AFC, that they can make plays outside the structure when their team needs them to, when things break down. And I just think that raises the ceiling of an offense. So even though the clean pocket play is stable from year to year, that doesn't mean that pressure performance and ability to create when things break down isn't important.
Ben, this was great, man.
Yeah. Really
appreciate your time and your insight on this, and appreciate all the work that went into this. Thanks for your time, buddy.
Anytime. Take care, guys.
All right, Ben Linsey, PFF. It's a ton of information that's out there, and it's quite comprehensive. We will go around the league coming up next. Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns coming up at 2:30. You listen to Cleveland Browns Daily on 850 ESPN Cleveland. Cold again outside. Sadly, nice hot bath or shower would feel amazing, and you can transform that wet space in your bathroom with a custom bath that'll feel like a spa for my friends at the Bath Authority. They can make it a reality for you at a fraction of the cost of the competitors. Bath Authority is Cleveland's premier bath and shower remodeler, expert factory-trained installers. You can give them a call now, $500 off your next custom bath or shower remodel. That number is 216-220-8399. You can change your bathroom from outdated to outstanding tub-to-shower conversions. Superior products, expert installers. $500 off right now. Tell them Beau sent you at 216-220-8399 or thebathauthority.com for more. The NFL Combine is next week in Indy. We will be there.
That's right. Front and center.
The one thing that I'm kind of wondering from an NFL standpoint is, as we go around the league here a little bit, is I wonder if it's just going to be too hard to move some of these guys. We got into this a little bit with Joel Corry when he was on with us. It's really complicated because every single one of this high-end quarterback group has no trades. Even Watson, like you say, well, Joel said, well, you got to wait on Watson until you figure out if he's in, what the level of trouble he's in or not is, or if there are charges, all of that. Even with all of that, Deshaun Watson still has to agree to the trade.
Correct. And I'm on Joel's article right now. Aaron Rodgers, availability, trade only, and says, whether he wants to remain in Green Bay or force a trade, that's up to him. Deshaun Watson, trade only, and as you mentioned correctly, no trade clause there. Russell Wilson, trade only, no trade clause as well for him, and he's willing to waive it. He said at times Bears, Cowboys, Raiders, Saints, and Broncos, Giants.
Run that by me again. Bears, Cowboys.
Raiders, Saints. That was last year. That was prior to 2021. And then this year he's added, look at him. Look at Frame. And then this year he's added the Broncos and the Giants to that list, apparently.
He would waive a no trade to play for the Giants?
New York City, man. Yeah, I think he's that kind of.
Well, I think so, too. I've always thought so, too. It just seems – that roster's better than you realize. There are more weapons than you realize there.
Or who are you that scared of and competing with in that division?
That's true. That's true. I mean, he'd get a lot of juice out of that, too, out of that city. His wife would, all of that.
He's instantly the best quarterback in the division.
With Dak. I mean, he's better than Dak, but it's close.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, he would be. Their roster's not as good as Dallas's, though. People keep adding the Broncos. I just think, the roster's attractive, but that factoring in that division is a full day. You're banking on – I think these guys don't care. They think they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof in any situation. They're better. But that division's tough.
How much does the Peyton Manning part of it play into it? He went there. And
the Manning Elway thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a blueprint for what can happen. And I think we don't look, it's not a place that a lot of people here go to. They don't. And most people hate Denver because of what happened in the 80s, right, around here. So there's a hatred of the Broncos from that. But from a city standpoint, it's pretty great. It's a big city. It's gorgeous. The Rocky Mountains are right behind you. You have all the ski in the world and all the winter recreation you want in the world right out your back door. And in the summers, there are sensational. Fall's great. I mean, it's a great climate. It's got kind of all of those things. So I think people sometimes don't understand how much of an attractive place Denver is.
Agreed.
It's
highly
underrated, I think, for most.
It's one of the fastest-growing cities in the country.
Yeah, and I think from a –
it has been for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think from an attractiveness standpoint, outside of the major markets, it's at the top of a list. It would be a top of a list with a few other teams in terms of desirable places you'd want to go play and live. Denver would be very high, and I think Manning is a big part of that. I mean, that's your best example of that. Everybody always felt in the league that Manning would obviously play his entire career in Indy, but there were I think most people thought he would go to Nashville as soon as his career was over. They'd go live in Nashville, or maybe he would end up back in New Orleans, or who knows, maybe even Indy. But he stayed. He was only in Denver 4 years, and he stayed. He's raising his family out there. Loves it. Not going anywhere. So, that's a little bit of what you're dealing with on that front. Yeah, the Giants are going to be formidable, but all of these guys control their own thing. There's nobody out here in this thing, and even that Garoppolo doesn't have a no trade that was lifted, but even Lynch after the NFC Championship game said to Garoppolo, essentially, we'll take care of you. They're going to put him in an advantageous spot, I would say.
Well, and then Schefter today was on a pod and said that not so fast on Garoppolo going anywhere, that there are perhaps concerns that Trey Lance is not yet ready to lead this team to the Super Bowl. Now, again,
that's what I was wondered about after the season.
There's still the Tom Brady thing.
Right.
So there's that, which is quite interesting. But I think, look, we talked about it yesterday. We played the go or stay game. And, yes, you could make the case that everybody that's a big name goes. You could also make the case that everybody stays with the exception, obviously, of Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, if he is playing football in the year 2022, will be playing for a team that is not the Houston Texans.
Although Lovie Smith just said, hey, look, the Bengals won 4 games, and last year they were in the Super Bowl. Why can't that be us? Legend.
Such a legend.
Legend. Prancing around here running things. But the difference is, so maybe Lovie thinks he's getting Deshaun Watson. Maybe he thinks he's getting him.
Yeah,
Because that's the only way they go from 4 to the Super Bowl.
Do you have Joe Burrow that we don't know about?
Unless you're changing Deshaun Watson's mind, it's hard for me to imagine it. He's the ultimate wild card in this whole thing, but even he controls his own destiny.
And he's the only one that, assuming he's able to work through his legal matters and that, there are no criminal charges filed, he is the only one that sets your franchise up into the 2030s. None of these other guys do.
No, they're all short term.
Right. And look.
Well, I mean, Russ is what, 32, 33?
I think he's older than you think.
Is he older than I think? Is he like
do.
Stafford's age? Like 34?
I just think let's see. Russ is.
He's a 5-year guy in college, or 4-year guy in college, 4 or 5.
He is turning 34 this season.
Okay, so similar age as Stafford.
Yeah.
So we're close. I mean,
maybe like 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, if he could, you can play to your 40 if you can stay healthy. You'd have him for. He's the one with the biggest stretch left in front of him, other than Watson, who's 25, 26. So he's got. You're talking about a franchise. I mean, if Deshaun Watson would not have gotten legal trouble, it would have been. I was trying to think even a bounty. It would have been probably the biggest bounty anyone's ever given up in the NFL history in terms of what the get back would have been.
Yes.
Nobody like that had ever hit the market.
No. Watson's the same age as Mahomes and Baker, 26.
Yeah. So nobody like that had ever hit the market before. So the get back on him was going to be unprecedented before all the legal stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and part of the reason I think the Texans are waiting is because once, as I said, he's one of one from that standpoint. Now, because of the fact that you saw what happened with, for example, the Rams, and at the end of the day, all that matters is you put one together. A short-term guy is fine if you win. The Rams did it with enormous pressure on them.
Tons.
And
the most pressure you could ever have. Yeah, I agree. I think one thing that this is what I think potentially could be for some of these places, and Denver would be an example of that. Some of these places that are attractive for players to go. What happened with the Rams, I'm thinking of Dallas. I mean, I'm thinking of those Tampa Bay, those type of places. I think we overvalue draft picks.
Of course we do.
Wildly across
Massively.
sports.
Yes.
Wildly.
Yes. I
if you are a place that is I just heard somebody having this conversation about the Lakers, like worrying about a draft pick in 2027. It's like, look, it's L.A.
People want to be there.
People are going to want to be there. As long as you have somebody young, you can attract people to play with them. And the same is true. It can't be quite that reckless. But there are, with the NFL and the way that it's done, if you're an attractive market, you can absolutely play a variation of the game the Rams played and be successful.
Well, and that's the thing that's amazing is it's a quick what if, and I know we got Jeff Lloyd coming up in a second, but if the Rams never move,
it's a totally different roster.
They don't have that roster.
No
chance.
They don't have Ramsey. They don't have Stafford.
They don't have Odell.
No. They're building it. Von Miller. They don't have any of that. They still have Donald because they drafted him in St. Louis, but they have Kupp because they drafted him. They would have Goff, but they don't have the rest of that.
No.
So where you are is they can do that because of where they reside. It really is that simple. All right, coming up next, Jeff Lloyd will join us, Locked On Browns. Just did a podcast on the 2 Buckeye receivers. Get his view of those 2 guys in the class in general. Coming up next, you're listening to Cleveland Browns Daily on 850 ESPN Cleveland. Football certainly isn't football without friends. Whether you're watching the Browns game alone, no one is going to get to hear your amazing in-game analysis, and the same is true when gambling. Keep things social. Never gamble alone. It's one of the helpful, responsible gambling tips you'll find at keepitfunohio.com. And now we head on the hotline for a visit with Jeff Lloyd, of course, host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and joins us on the hotline now. Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time. The reason for this, other than the fact that we enjoy your work, certainly is what you've most recently done with the two Ohio State receivers. And we don't like to say the guy who wears number 5's name for fear of it being jinxed. So you can say it all you want, and that's fine. We won't probably acknowledge it, but this certainly piques our interest. So in terms of these two guys, and knowing that program as well as I do, and knowing the position coach as well as I do, I know they're going to come in ready to go. What did you see with he who shall not be named and Chris Olave?
Well, first things first, both players. And this is, I mean, look, when you're talking about, what's your favorite ice cream, this is probably definitely, this type of definition when you're talking draft analysis of these two types of players. Both win. They very, very different styles in how they win. Obviously, I guess we'll go with number 5. Number 5 excels in the big play, the circus catches. He's going to be a little bit bigger than Chris Olave. He's going to be a little bit longer than Chris Olave. He's probably going to be a better jumper than Chris Olave. So a lot of the, that type of stuff, that everybody likes the Moss factor. You're certainly getting that with Garrett Wilson. The ability is against man coverage, you think is going to improve. There are some tendencies at times where it's more about, trying to, school a defensive back, with his footwork as opposed to just making sure you're running the route, basically the way you need it to, which is where Olave comes in. And for Chris Olave, I think Chris Olave, there's a very, very top-heavy amount of wide receivers in this class that everybody mentions anywhere, around the Browns selection at 13. It seems Chris Olave is a name that doesn't come in there.
Right.
And for me, this is kind of where I went down this path. Olave, just with 3 years of solid production, I think that this is one thing that's going both well for he and Wilson is both played with two quarterbacks at Ohio State. So it's not like either guy was just hamstrung to one guy, and you can say, oh, can we separate him from the pack? And you saw both these guys have times of excellence, with either quarterback, with Fields, and of course with Stroud in their time in Columbus. But for Olave, it just seems like this is one of these times where this is a guy that's just going to go underdrafted, and we're going to sit back 2 years from now. Chris Olave will have 160 receptions in 2 years in the NFL, over 2,500 yards, probably close to 20 touchdowns, and we'll wonder why he didn't go top 15, top 20, maybe even top 25, on some boards. So I think the thing for Olave is it's more of, what do you like? I think Chris Olave right now today, if I'm playing right now today, I'm ready for Chris Olave. I think he's as complete can be. Does that mean that number 5 doesn't maybe have a little bit of a higher ceiling? It certainly possibly does have a little bit of a higher ceiling, but there certainly is work to be done. Both players are around the same age. Olave is probably going to test a little bit faster. Olave has a little bit more experience, even though both players are only 1 month apart as far as age is going. But this was an exercise of just basically going through two dynamic players from the same team and seeing which one is maybe better. And I think one may be better today in Chris Olave. Wilson certainly has the possibility to be better down the road. And if I'm looking at this for the Browns, and it's one last year with, possibly Baker Mayfield, where a huge decision is going to have to be made, I'm maybe looking for the player that I think is day one ready, and I'm getting him as complete as possible. And for me, that would be Chris Olave. There's no questions on the speed. It's where he wanted to be. Everything else checks out. And I think he's just one of these guys that's not going to disrupt any part of the flow of the offense. He's going to be in the window when he needs to be in the window, and seems to catch everything thrown his way.
Jeff, that was a wonderful, comprehensive breakdown of both of those guys, and obviously you make the case for Olave. Could you give us just, I know some people don't love doing comps, but just stylistically, who are people that succeed in the NFL currently at receiver that succeed in ways most similar to Olave and to Wilson?
I think if you wanted to say Chris Olave, maybe not as dynamic as Justin Jefferson from Minnesota, but very similar. If everybody remembers when Justin Jefferson was coming out of LSU, a lot of people at the time had him tied to just being the slot receiver. They didn't believe he was as fast as he was. Went to the combine, ran in the 4.4s. Minnesota drafted him with the sole purpose of we're going to put him on the outside. We're going to play him on the outside, and he's been absolutely ridiculous ever since. Maybe Jefferson's a little bit more polished, but, I mean, if you're saying just a little bit less than Justin Jefferson by any means whatsoever, that is not necessarily, any sort of disrespect. Yeah, that's a pretty good compliment. And when would he get to, of course, with Wilson, I mean, I think he plays a little bit bigger than he is. The basketball, background in his life certainly plays to that. Can play above the rim, so he's that type of guy. You think the flashes of some of what Odell Beckham Jr., what made him so famous on the catches of, wow, where did that come from? How was he able to make a play like that? And I think you get that with Wilson. I think Wilson is just the overall rounding out of everything else is what needs to be there. And it was probably difficult. I mean, you got to figure, there was another receiver this year who in Ohio State who had, better statistical output than both these guys. You figure in your last year in college, you're going to get every target possible. But it was really, kind of difficult for these two guys, obviously, with the guy man in the slot in Columbus this fall.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. And by the way, Beau had earlier given a little Justin Jefferson for Olave, so it's nice to hear that corroborated. But it feels like
there we go.
That's what you want in this offense, though, isn't it? Somebody that is going to be where they're supposed to be, runs the routes, the smoothness, the great route runner, and Olave has a little bit more of that polish right now than Wilson.
They're both really polished.
they're getting great coaching.
They're really – I mean – And you could speak to the chat. I mean, Jamison Williams was in this room, couldn't get on the field. The guy that played the slot for him this year is probably be the first receiver off the board next year. Brian Hartline gets guys ready. Like these guys, they're ready-made. There's freshmen there that you're going to be hearing about in the next couple of years that'll follow right in these footsteps. I'm sure you saw that on the film as you were looking at these guys.
Oh, there's no question about it up in Columbus. I mean, just go right to the bowl game. No Olave, no Wilson, and the step up. And of course, everybody knows the name, and it seems like we've been talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. Probably since about his second year of high school. Obviously, a big opportunity here for him, obviously now to get the grand stage. But Brian Hartline, took what he learned in the NFL, all the hard work and dedication to get into the NFL as he did, and it's just a factory. Granted, you're getting the cream of the cream, but you do end up with a guy like Jamison Williams, who for some reason or another it didn't work out. There were other guys they chose to play over him more consistently. It does seem weird when we're talking about schools the level of Ohio State or Alabama that one guy leaves said school to go to the other school and does become the player that he did. But and I'll be honest, and this is a difficult one too, because a player like Jamison Williams, everything you saw this year was so impressive and just that heartbreaking going down, obviously, in the national championship game. And where the road is now for him, somebody's going to get themselves a treat probably a little later than they would have if Jamison Williams had been healthy in this class. But for Brian Hartline, I think the one question for Brian Hartline is going to be is, how long does he want to stick around and coach wide receivers in Ohio State? Because it seems like the job of head coach there is tied up for a while. And, we're talking about the point where Brian Hartline, it's probably time to start thinking about Brian Hartline if he wants his own program. He's probably starting to trend towards that way.
Certainly is. Talking with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, Jeff, you talked about the Ohio State receivers. How do you see them fitting in with some of the other receivers in this draft? And is it your belief that one of these Ohio State guys is, the best for the Browns, or is a guy Burks intriguing, London intriguing? And the idea I floated out earlier, which was take one of these guys, give me Cinco at 13, and let's trade back in and get Jamison Williams late in the first, and let's go.
That is a very, very, very tempting idea. And I'll be honest, the trade back scenario is very tempting in this draft. This team like the Eagles with 3 first-round picks. Teams like the Raiders, you always want to look at those teams that were in the playoffs but needed more. The Raiders sitting there at 22, certainly a prime example. I think a lot of them fit, because I think one thing we're trying to look for here is we're trying to look for more consistent route runners, better route runners here. Maybe Coach Stefanski, not totally off the faith of his offense, but would like to see something new infused to it. We've gotten to see that a little bit with Donovan Peoples-Jones. We got to see a little bit with Anthony Schwartz, but now maybe trying to up the athleticism here even a little bit more. Jamison Williams I thought was going to be a fantastic, guy to put into this place. Maybe, we'll see the way the Browns feel on that as far as his health, and certainly where his health is at by the time end of April comes around. But you look at London, and I know there's a lot of people, going to be questioning the athleticism, and I don't know if we're going to get athletic numbers due to his broken ankle, so I don't know if he's going to be able to work out next week at the Combine. But you're talking about a former All-State basketball player in the state of California. Great, tremendous dunking ability at 6'3.5" that he is. So he can get off the ground. Certainly, improves catch radius. For Baker Mayfield, also increases the decreases the miss factor. A lot of people are questioning his ability to separate at USC. He was playing with a quarterback play that was not up to his level. There's a lot of incidents where you see Drake London open immediately, but waiting for a ball to get to him. really, really interesting, dynamic player. I mean, you cannot not question the statistical output he had while he was at USC. Didn't play a ton of games at USC. Very similar career path in college to Greg Newsome, who the Browns did take last year in round one as far as missed a lot of time. It didn't bother him with Greg Newsome. I don't necessarily think it's going to bother him with Drake London. Burks is just a freak. You talk about the guy that he's got the athletic ability from being a baseball center fielder in his past. He can play in the slot. Everybody is in love with Deebo Samuel and having that type of presence. This might be a guy that can do that type of things at his size. Long strider. His time might confuse people at the combine just because these long striders, they usually don't time as well as you think they are. But, I mean, 2 strides, he covers 5 yards. He moves, catches almost everything thrown to him. And for him, where he was at Arkansas and it was just about 70 receptions, you can understand working him in, even though you have a Donovan Peoples-Jones, you have an Anthony Schwartz, you have a team that likes tight ends, certainly a team that likes to run the ball. So it shouldn't be that hard for him to understand there's not going to be 10 to 12 targets week in, week out.
Just recently with him to receiver, though, right? Because the year before they used him all over the place. And so is there any concern with polish there?
Well, I think if you're looking at it from that Deebo Samuel standpoint, I think you kind of like it. Because, hey, I mean, you brought in Anthony Schwartz with hoping to do these type of things. You want to be able to use every option to you. But, look, you still think Donovan Peoples-Jones in year 3, we saw growth in year 2. There's no reason we'll see growth in year 3. And then, of course, Anthony Schwartz, a really tough rookie year with a lot of missed time. But week 1 looked like he was going to be a huge part of this offense. Had a good week against Green Bay. Towards the end of the season, you have a top 100 pick invested in him. You're certainly counting on him some. I do believe somehow, some way, they're going to bring in some sort of veteran free agent here, understanding that somebody's going to kind of have to be, the mom or dad of the room if you move on from number 80, which is a huge if in that standpoint. Sure. But I don't think you want to just roll out an entire wide receiver room where everybody is 23 years old or younger.
It's going to be interesting to see how they do that. We've spent a lot of time talking receiver. I think the other big question right now for this Browns team is the defensive line, Jeff. And this offseason, we'd say fixing the passing game that encompasses improved quarterback play, improved talent at wide receiver. We've talked a lot about how to do that via the draft. Then there's the defensive line. And you've got Miles coming back, Clowney, a free agent. Certainly would love to have him back. Some questions in the middle of that defense. We kind of feel like the first pick is either going to be a receiver or an edge defender, probably more receiver, leaning that way than edge. But if you go receiver, it feels like second round would be a young edge guy. What do you kind of make of where the Browns are in terms of priorities for talent in this draft and really and including free agency?
Well, I mean, for everybody who wants to bounty about what the Browns are going to do with their first round pick, if it turns out that Jadeveon Clowney decides he's not coming back, it's 50-50, or if not more, probably in favor of edge. You need something opposite Myles Garrett because you need to take the other team to not take 2 and 3 defenders and put them on Myles Garrett. He needs somebody compatible to his abilities. And you look at what the Browns did last year. Over a calendar year, 2 off seasons, they tried to get Jadeveon Clowney. They tried to pick up Takk McKinley about 6 different times in the 2020 season before they finally got him in here for the 2021 season. So that means even if you're bringing in and retaining Jadeveon Clowney, you're still going hard to get after it. There's no way you went after 2 former first-round picks, and if Clowney resigns, that you're going to say, okay, well, that's good enough. They want them to be athletic. They want them to be foot speed fast. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. Number one, you can't be gassed, which they want enough guys so you don't get into that situation. And number 2, you need to get into the situation, where these guys need to be foot fast enough to run with these guys. And that's what they tried to assemble last year. And that was one thing that was certainly working for this team last year, even though a lot of things weren't. The defensive line rotation, the end rotation was working solid. As far as edge rushers, I mean, you can look in the first round. You can look in round 2, a player out of South Carolina who had a nice week down at the Senior Bowl, Kingsley Anabare. Nice build to him, long, had a ton of success in his days down in South Carolina. Solid ball player in his own respect. Then he gets a bunch of other guys. Majee Sanders out of Cincinnati. The only question there is going to be whether or not he's going to, for them, look the size. Is he going to weigh enough? The Browns do like about 255, 260 in their defensive ends. So it'll certainly be interesting for him if he fits in that side. But he does have experience playing on the inside. And the Browns like to play 3 pass rushers in, obvious passing situations. So you can move Miles around. Certainly if you have Jadeveon, you can move him around. So you have that going for you. You look at other players. Cameron Thomas out of San Diego State. This is a guy who just got progressively better all 4 years down at San Diego State. Finished it off with an 11-sack season this year for the Aztecs. A lot of players in the Mountain West. I mean, you can go on for days. There's some guys here we're going to question about age, though. It could be a little bit of an issue. I know everybody likes Boye Mafe out of Minnesota. He's already 23 years old. To this point in this Browns regime, they have not taken a player who was that age on draft day. Maybe this is a year they have to, go against the grain on that one because it's just going to be traditionally an older draft due to the COVID year and all of these guys getting an extra year of participation. Maybe they sway that way, but normally analytic people, they stick to their guns here. So there are some players in that thing, but there's guys up until like day 2 and day 3. I even like, I like Tyreek Smith out of Ohio State, probably early on day 3. There were times at Senior Bowl, he was just blowing past people. And if you look at him at the 3rd, 4th pass rusher, if he's coming in for 10, 12 reps a game, he's going to come in 100% jacked, ready to go. We're
Get going.
3rd quarter, 4th quarter, and he is ready to go.
Great stuff, Jeff. Love talking to you, man. This was fun. Really appreciate your perspective and time today, man.
Oh, anytime, boys. I appreciate you guys for taking the time to have me on here.
Of course.
That's great. Jeff Lloyd, Locked On Browns on the podcast. A lot of good perspective there as you start to look at the varying options that are out there. And, boy, a lot of the stuff we've talked about that stuff with Olave and Wilson and kind of the difference between the two of them.
The ball's not going to spike itself.
Long time ago, they are similar to the way Chase and Jefferson are. They're not the same players.
Sure.
But the reason Chase was drafted the way he was drafted is because of the explosiveness of his game. And you saw that in year 1 paired with the perfect quarterback for it. Jefferson was the more polished guy coming out of Minnesota or out of LSU and lands at Minnesota and lands in the perfect spot. And he's silky smooth.
He's so good.
And that's how Olave is. Olave is like that. He's that silky smooth. And I don't know necessarily that the two Buckeye players are at that level, but they might be. And if they were, I wouldn't be surprised if they were those type of players, if they were at the same level. It would not surprise me if Olave's as good as Jefferson. That would not surprise me at all. Wilson, same thing with Chase. Different, but in terms of the impact they could have, I think it could be that significant. That's how good those guys are.
Injected
a lot
in
of
my
talent.
Veins. Let's go. Gimme.
Look at this. Look at Swag. Swag's got he's got. What would we call those? The shoe he's got on there.
That's one of those boots.
But what are those things called? Those boots? The why am I blanking on that? Like the slip-on booty.
Yeah, it's like a boot. It's
like a Chelsea boot. It's like a Chelsea boot.
Yeah, it's not a chukka.
No. It's a Chelsea boot with a gorgeous white sole and a nice gray suede leather material. But what really separates him today is the jacket. The jacket is just a
window
sensation.
pane over
vest,
a turtleneck. Right? It's over a turtleneck.
Is it really?
It's like a quarter zip turtleneck.
God, does he got a?
Is what it looked like to me.
He's got a quarter zip turtleneck.
Yeah, and then a
window pane, a gray window pane,
and then a white button down underneath as the third layer.
God,
and look, I mean, two fashion icons right there, just going head pure
electricity. So much more to come. You're listening to Cleveland Browns Daily on 850 ESPN Cleveland. Injury lawyers dedicated to every client every day. Call 1-800-ELK-OHIO. Elk & Elk's a proud partner of your Cleveland Browns. It's getting close, man. Combine's going to be fun next week. Going to be a lot of this.
Yeah.
Get a feel for where the league is. So we look forward to that next week here on the program. You can look forward to the next level. It's coming up next. Thanks for listening, everybody. Cleveland Browns Daily, 850 ESPN Cleveland.
You're down. Thank you.
Yep.